The meanest person you've ever loved. My grandmother Betty was the cruelest, most heartless woman I've ever met, and I absolutely adored her until the day she died. This woman would say things to people that would make a grown man cry, but somehow I always felt like she was protecting me from the world in her own twisted way. Let me paint you a picture of just how mean Betty could be. When I was 12, my friend Katie came over for dinner. Katie was a little overweight and kind of shy, but she was sweet and made me laugh. We sat down to eat, and Betty looked Katie up and down and said, "Honey, you sure you need seconds? You're getting a little thick around the middle." Katie turned bright red and barely spoke for the rest of the night. I was mortified. But then Betty leaned over and whispered to me, "That girl needs to learn to stand up for herself before high school, or kids are gonna eat her alive." In Betty's mind, she was doing Katie a favor by toughening her up early. Completely backwards logic, but that's how her brain worked. She did this to everyone. When my mom brought her new boyfriend around, Betty spent the entire evening asking him invasive questions about his finances, his ex-wife, and why he was dating a woman with kids. The poor guy left early and never came back. Mom was furious, but Betty just shrugged and said, "If he can't handle a few questions, he's not worth your time anyway." The thing is, Betty had grown up during the Great Depression with parents who died when she was 14. She raised her 3 younger siblings by herself, working 2 jobs and lying about her age to get hired at factories. By the time she was 20, she'd seen more hardship than most people see in their entire lives. Her meanness came from this place of wanting to prepare everyone for the worst possible scenarios because she'd lived through them herself. When I was 16 and crying over some boy who dumped me, Betty sat me down and said, "Stop crying over that little weasel. You think tears are gonna make him want you back? You're embarrassing yourself." It sounds harsh, but then she spent the next 2 hours teaching me how to do my makeup properly and telling me stories about all the idiots she dated before she met my grandfather. By the end of the night, I felt stronger instead of sorry for myself. Betty never sugarcoated anything. When I got rejected from my first choice college, she didn't give me the whole "everything happens for a reason" speech. She said, "Well, that sucks, but sitting around feeling sorry for yourself isn't gonna change anything. What's your backup plan?" She helped me research other schools, drove me to campus visits, and even wrote letters to admissions offices when I was too scared to call them myself. She was mean about it the entire time, calling me a quitter when I wanted to give up, but she never let me actually quit. The meanest thing Betty ever said was also the most loving, and I didn't understand it until years later. When I was 18 and about to leave for college, I was going through this phase where I thought I was smarter than everyone in our small town. I kept talking about how I was going to move to the big city and never come back to this boring place. Betty listened to me go on and on about my big plans, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "You think you're so much better than everyone here, but you're just a scared little girl who's never been more than 50 miles from home. You're going to fall flat on your face out there, and when you do, don't come crying to me." I was so hurt and angry that I didn't speak to her for 2 months. But you know what happened? I did fall flat on my face. College was way harder than I expected. I was homesick, my grades were terrible, and I had no idea how to do basic things like manage money or do laundry properly. But because Betty had been so harsh about it, I was determined to prove her wrong. I figured out how to study effectively, got a part-time job, made friends, and ended up graduating with honors. When I called to tell her about graduation, the first thing she said was, "See, I knew you had it in you. You just needed someone to light a fire under your butt." That's when I realized that everything Betty had said wasn't meant to hurt me. She was mean because she loved me enough to tell me the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable. She never told me I was perfect or special just for existing. Instead, she pushed me to actually become the person I was capable of being. When Betty was dying of cancer, she refused to let anyone feel sorry for her. Even when she was barely able to speak, she was still giving people brutal advice about their relationships and life choices. Right up until the end, she was trying to make everyone around her stronger. I miss her meanness every single day. In a world full of people who tell you what you want to hear, Betty was the only person who loved me enough to tell me what I needed to hear, no matter how much it stung. That kind of tough love is rare, and I'd give anything to have one more conversation with the meanest woman I ever loved.